Alistair looked at the empty digital vault on his monitor. The balance read 0. Exactly 48 hours ago, it held $80 million in client acquisition funds. Beside him, his business partner, Dominic, calmly adjusted his designer watch. Dominic did not look shocked. He looked bored. "The security logs are wiped, Alistair," Dominic said, his voice flat. "Cyber Command says it's an untraceable external breach. The firm is bankrupt. We need to sign the liquidation papers by midnight, or the regulators will arrest us both." Alistair's hands grew cold. 5 years of sleepless nights building this London wealth agency gone. But it wasn't just the loss that made his stomach turn. It was the smell of expensive sandalwood cologne on Dominic's collar. Dominic claimed he had been at a family funeral in a remote Scottish village all week. Yet, that specific luxury scent was only sold at a private boutique in Mayfair, directly next to their primary offshore clearing bank. Alistair felt a sickening wave of clarity. The thief wasn't a nameless hacker. The thief was sitting right across the desk. Alistair shifts from paralyzing grief over his ruined life to a sharp, icy focus as he realizes his closest friend is his executioner. "I'll sign," Alistair lied softly, checking the wall clock. "But I need to collect my father's old desk clock before the bailiffs lock the building." The office building was pitch black by 9 p.m. Alistair didn't go to his father's desk. Instead, he slipped down the corridor to the small, dusty server room hidden behind the break area. Dominic had wiped the main cloud-based servers completely clean, believing he had erased every digital footprint. But Dominic had forgotten about the antique, battery-operated model train sitting on top of the high filing cabinet. 3 years ago, after a minor break-in, Alistair had secretly hidden an offline Nanny-Cam inside the train's tiny plastic coal car. It was entirely separate from the company's network, recording to an internal micro-SD card. With shaking fingers, Alistair retrieved the card and slotted it into his personal tablet. He skipped the playback to Tuesday at 3:00 a.m., the exact timestamp of the supposed cyber breach. The screen flickered to life in night vision green. A figure walked into the frame using a master keycard. The betrayal transforms from a terrible suspicion into an undeniable, horrifying reality that shatters his remaining loyalty. The screen illuminated Dominic's face as he typed a sequence into the master terminal, holding a slip of paper with a unique routing number. Dominic hadn't just stolen the money. The footage showed him using Alistair's cloned digital signature to authorize the final release. The slip of paper in his hand bore the logo of a private bank in Zurich. Alistair couldn't go to the police yet. If Dominic realized he was caught, he would flee the country immediately, leaving Alistair to face the regulators alone. He needed to know exactly where that $80 million had landed. He called Fiona, a retired forensic accountant who owed his family her career. He sent her a cropped, high-resolution screenshot of the Zurich routing code from the video. 10 minutes later, his phone vibrated in the dark room. "Alistair, this account belongs to an offshore shell company," Fiona whispered, her voice tense. "But Dominic isn't the registered beneficiary on the Swiss documents. It's under a name that makes no sense." A deep, isolating sense of dread creeps in as Alistair realizes the conspiracy against him is far wider than a greedy business partner. "The account belongs to Clara," Fiona said quietly. "Your fiancé." Alistair sat across from Clara in their high-end apartment, watching her pour 2 glasses of red wine. Her smile was perfectly serene. They were supposed to get married in 3 weeks. "Dominic called me," Clara said, her voice dripping with soft sympathy. "He told me about the tragic cyber attack. But we still have our health, Alistair. We can move to Spain, start over." Dominic even offered to give us a massive loan from his personal savings to help us buy a coastal villa. Alistair swallowed a bitter lump in his throat. The loan was his own stolen money. He looked at Clara's wrist, noticing a new, diamond-encrusted bracelet. The small gold clasp bore the stamp of a luxury jeweler located in Zurich. She hadn't been visiting her sick mother in Sussex last weekend. She had been with Dominic. He reached into his pocket and subtly pressed the record button on his phone, hiding his rage behind a calm mask. The agonizing pain of romantic betrayal hardens into a calculated, ruthless desire for absolute retribution. Dominic is so generous, Alistair murmured, leaning forward. Did he buy you that Zurich bracelet before or after you both emptied my company account? Clara's wine glass rattled against the mahogany table. Her smile vanished instantly, her eyes turning cold and detached. Don't be ridiculous, Alistair, she said, her voice losing all its warmth. You're cracking under the stress of your failure. If you start throwing wild accusations around, people will assume you're the one who stole the funds to cover your debts. She stood up, grabbed her trench coat, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. Alistair watched her from the window. Down on the street, a black sedan was waiting with its engine running. She got into the passenger seat, and the car sped away. The driver was Dominic. 10 minutes later, Alistair's laptop chimed. Dominic had just initiated an emergency legal filing to strip Alistair of his remaining corporate shares, citing financial negligence. The trap was closing tightly around him. Alistair experiences a wave of bitter humiliation as his enemies openly mock his helplessness and take everything he has left. A formal email notification landed in his inbox. The regulatory authority has scheduled an emergency fraud hearing for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. The corporate boardroom was freezing the next morning. Dominic sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 high-priced defense lawyers. Clara stood near the door, her arms crossed, looking at Alistair with detached pity. Thank you for showing up, Alistair, Dominic said, sliding a termination contract across the table. As sole controlling director now, I've already submitted the financial logs to the regulators. They're downstairs right now. We've shown them that the external breach originated from your personal IP address. The lawyers looked at Alistair with smug satisfaction. They had a mountain of forged digital evidence prepared to pin the entire $80 million theft on him. He was looking at 20 years in prison. Alistair sat down slowly, refusing to touch the pen. He adjusted his jacket, ignoring the sweat cooling on his neck. Alistair forces his heart rate down, channeling his absolute terror into a silent, lethal focus. I'm not signing that, Dominic, Alistair said softly, opening his tablet. Because the regulators aren't here for me. Alistair turned the tablet screen toward the lawyers and pressed play on the hidden CCTV footage from the server room. The room became completely silent. The smug smiles faded from the defense lawyers' faces as they watched the high-definition footage of Dominic typing the wire transfer codes at 3 a.m., holding the slip of paper with the matching Zurich routing numbers. This is a pathetic fabrication, Dominic snarled, though his face turned visibly pale. A cheap video changes nothing. The official digital network logs bear your signature, Alistair. The legal system only cares about the network trail. You're right, Alistair replied smoothly. The legal system cares about the trail. Which is why I didn't try to block the wire transfer when I found out last night. Dominic frowned, his arrogance wavering. What do you mean? A surge of pure adrenaline rushes through Alistair as he watches the first cracks of panic appear in Dominic's expression. I mean, Alistair whispered. I let the transfer go through because I needed to see exactly which offshore account you sent it to. Alistair tapped the tablet screen again, bringing up a live financial document certified by the Swiss Financial Intelligence Unit. Fiona found something very interesting when she dug into your offshore shell company, Dominic, Alistair explained, his voice entirely calm. You and Clara thought you were being clever using a private Swiss node. Baltic Capital is part of a global anti-money laundering watch list. Clara took a step backward, her back hitting the boardroom door. What is he talking about, Dominic? Dominic didn't answer. He was staring at the bottom of the Swiss document. Alistair hadn't just tracked the $80 million. The forensic audit had uncovered a secondary, older balance hidden within the exact same shell account. A massive sum of money deposited over the last 3 years. Alistair feels a cold, profound satisfaction as he prepares to drop the ultimate truth that changes the entire scope of the war. The $80 million is frozen, Alistair said. But the audit also uncovered the $12 million you've been skimming from our clients' retirement funds since 2023. Dominic slammed his hands onto the glass table, his face twisted in rage. You don't have the authority to trigger an international freeze on my accounts. You're a minority shareholder now. He doesn't, a sharp voice echoed from the doorway. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't the local corporate regulators. It was Alistair's older brother, Callum, a senior investigator with the Serious Fraud Office, accompanied by 2 uniformed federal agents. Callum walked into the room, tossing a heavy leather folder onto the table. But the Serious Fraud Office has full authority, Dominic. Alistair brought us the Nanny-Cam footage and the Mayfair boutique receipts at midnight. We didn't need your network logs. We just needed the transaction to hit the Swiss watchlist account. Clara began to tremble, her face entirely drained of color. She looked at Dominic, then at the federal agents, realizing their flawless plan had been an open book for hours. The crushing isolation Alistair endured completely evaporates as his secret preparation stands fully revealed. Callum stepped up to the head of the table, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Dominic Vance, you're under arrest for international wire fraud and grand larceny. Dominic fell back into his leather chair, his jaw slack. The high-priced defense lawyers were already packing their briefcases, stepping away from their client to avoid any association with the collapse. Clara had nothing to do with the retirement funds. Dominic suddenly blurted out, a desperate attempt to save his accomplice. She didn't know about the wire. She's innocent, Alistair. Clara rushed toward Alistair, tears streaming down her face, her hands reaching out in a desperate plea. Alistair, please. Dominic forced me into this. He threatened to ruin my family's estate if I didn't get him your personal security passwords. You know I love you. Alistair stepped back, his expression entirely blank. He tapped his tablet one final time, activating the audio file he had recorded at the dinner table the previous evening. Alistair feels a deep, clean sense of closure as Clara's frantic lies are instantly dismantled by her own recorded words. The boardroom speakers played Clara's sharp, mocking voice. We spent 8 months planning this, Alistair. You think a tiny hidden camera changes things? Clara froze, her hands dropping to her sides as her own voice echoed through the room. The federal agents moved past her, grabbing Dominic by the arms and forcing him out of his executive chair. The lawyers told us it was foolproof, Dominic muttered, his voice breaking as the steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. The man who had been adjusting his luxury watch with bored arrogance yesterday was now shaking, his expensive sandalwood cologne completely masked by the smell of cold sweat. The boardroom doors opened again, revealing a crowd of financial journalists waiting in the main lobby, tipped off by Fiona an hour earlier. Flashbulbs illuminated the dim corridor as Dominic was led out, his head bowed, his face covered by his suit jacket. Alistair watches the public shame intended for him permanently transfer to its rightful owners, feeling the immense weight leave his chest. Clara screamed Alistair's name as an agent grabbed her arm, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor as she was dragged toward the cameras. Alistair stood by the massive boardroom window, watching the 2 police vans being loaded down on the crowded London street. The journalists were surrounding the vehicles, broadcasting the collapse of Vance and Associates live to the evening news. The Swiss authorities had already begun the reverse wire process. Because the fraud was caught in real time, the $80 million was being routed directly back into the client acquisition fund under federal supervision. The firm's clients wouldn't lose a single penny, and Alistair's professional reputation remained completely pristine. Callum walked up next to his brother, watching the police vans drive away into the city traffic. It's totally over, Alistair, Callum said softly. The state is seizing Dominic's Mayfair properties and his vehicle collection to cover the older stolen funds. They are going away for a very long time. Alistair transitions from the intense, calculated mindset of conflict to a quiet, profound realization of safety. Alistair picked up his paper-wrapped package from the shelf, holding his father's old brass desk clock securely in his hands. Let's go home, Callum. 2 weeks later, Alistair stood in the empty penthouse apartment he had shared with Clara. The luxury furniture was gone, stripped away, and sold to clear the remaining corporate transition costs. Clara's expensive Zurich bracelet had been officially confiscated as an asset purchased with stolen money. Every physical reminder of the life he thought he was building had been completely erased. He received a final legal notice from his corporate attorneys. With Dominic permanently removed and his shares invalidated by the criminal indictment, Alistair was now the sole owner of a debt-free, multi-million-dollar wealth agency. His enemies had tried to bury him in a digital grave, but they had only succeeded in digging their own. Alistair feels a clean, unburdened sense of triumph as the physical remnants of his old life vanish, leaving a blank slate. He dropped his apartment keys onto the bare kitchen counter, walked out, and closed the heavy door behind him for the last time. The trial lasted less than 3 days. Faced with high-definition CCTV footage, recorded audio confessions, and an undeniable forensic paper trail, Dominic's defense team completely collapsed. Dominic pleaded guilty to all counts of international wire fraud and corporate theft to avoid the maximum penalty. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in a maximum security prison. Clara, found guilty of conspiracy and corporate espionage, received 7 years. Alistair sat quietly in the back row of the gallery as the sentences were read. Dominic turned his head to look at him one last time, his face gaunt, his eyes entirely hollowed out by his new reality. Alistair didn't look back with anger or hatred. He looked back with absolute indifference. The final remnants of emotional tension dissolve as the legal system seals the fate of those who tried to destroy him. As the bailiffs led the prisoners through the side door, Alistair stood up, buttoned his tailored coat, and walked out into the afternoon air. The afternoon sun was exceptionally bright over the Thames as Alistair walked across Waterloo Bridge. The London air felt crisp, sharp, and clean. The suffocating weight of suspicion, betrayal, and anger that had consumed his mind for months was entirely gone. He had saved his company, protected his family's legacy, and exposed the greed of the 2 people who had plotted his downfall. His firm was thriving, built on a new foundation of absolute transparency. He stopped by the granite railing, looking out over the glittering water. He pulled Clara's old engagement ring from his coat pocket, looked at the diamond for a brief second, and let it drop into the deep river below. He was no longer a character in their twisted game. He was the author of his own life. Alistair achieves absolute closure and peace, fully stepping into his new future with a healed, unburdened heart. Some people steal to build a kingdom, but they always forget that a house built on stolen gold is just a prison waiting for a key.